I'm Allison,
I'm Madeline.
and I am the mom of a bunch of Malones, one of whom is this. We're talking about parenting because I love to talk about parenting. The more I talk about it, the more I think about it, and the better job that I do. We have had our family at home for almost 25 years, and so we've had a lot of time for me to mess things up and to wonder about things and to look for answers and to find some. So I just want to share with you what we've learned and what's helpful. So tell us a little bit about ourselves.
Well, we are believers, so we believe that Jesus died for our sins and rose on the third day, and the gospel has gives us a lot of insight into parenting and dealing with kids and understanding sin nature and ourselves and our relationships with other people. So I think Mama is very wise, so I'll be asking her some questions today specifically about toddlers and what they're like and how to deal with them and how to enjoy them.
I would like to say that I dressed up today
You look great.
because I'm going to go work out, but she looks cute, so just go with that. Okay.
Okay, Mom. First question. Why are toddlers great?
Toddlers are so great. I think everybody knows this, right? They're adorable and they're exciting and they are pretty much brilliant. You're watching their brain develop, I feel like. Like they don't know something and then the next day they do and they're doing something with it. It's just really exciting to be around them. I love toddlers because they are wide open for influence, like they're ready to learn, and what you give them, they'll have the rest of their life. So I think that's really, really exciting. They're really entertaining. Like the way they do stuff and the way they think about stuff and the way they accomplish and communicate, everything is pretty much entertaining. So we didn't have a TV for many, many years because we had toddlers. So we didn't need any other entertainment. And I think that it is, I just want to go back to it sets the course. Parenting a toddler sets the course for their entire life. So I think parenting them is also really exciting. And I love that job.
It's a good one.
Good, great one. Best career ever.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what is difficult about having a toddler?
Well, people struggle with toddlers for a lot of reasons. For one, they're actually smart. Like, it's hard to know just how smart a kid is because they're not necessarily super verbal, but they really have brains going on. And that's difficult to parent around because you don't really know what they're understanding and what they're not, so they can get away with a lot more than you realize. On the other hand, they don't always act rationally because they're little and they're unpredictable and they're not easily controlled because they're very emotional and not necessarily logical. So that makes it difficult. And then people don't want to admit their kids are sinners, typically. I think that's a huge, huge weakness, and one of the main difficulties in parenting toddlers is when you do not admit that they actually sin. Because if you just make excuses for them or think about it in the positive or write it off or misdirect, then what you're actually doing is letting that sin flourish, and they're getting better and better at it. And by the time their brains are almost done developing, they are very practiced at doing exactly what they want or getting their way, which all of us do. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, I think. And we love our kids, so we don't want to think badly about them. So we turn out hurting them and really handicapping them for the rest of their life.
It might not be self-deceptive. Like, you might just not realize that your kid is sinning, or not recognize what they're doing as sin and not just normal baby actions.
And a lot of our job as parenting is studying our children and really getting to know them. So it is up to you to figure it out. And that's what you're going to find a lot of times, because it turns out toddlers are human. They're just like us, except for we're larger and her hair's fixed. So I think those are some of the main differences. I think another thing, well, I just wrote this down because I tried to make notes, but I wrote down that if people love their child, sometimes they don't want to say no to them. That's kind of a thing that I've heard. I don't hang out with a lot of people who are terrible parents, but that's a terrible parent. Like, that's the opposite of what the Bible says about parenting. It says, "For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives." So God is the perfect parent, disciplines and chastises those that he loves. So we, trying to imitate him, should definitely do the same. And the Lord reproves him who he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights. So God is comparing himself to a good father on earth by talking about reproving. So that's like correcting and training and that sort of thing. So a good parent would definitely be saying no to a toddler. That's what a good loving parent is going to do. So I think those are some of the confusing things. People have trouble with toddlers for those reasons, and I'd be one of those people.
Yeah, that's important to remember that they are human.
Yeah.
And they do have sin to deal with.
Yeah.
Sometimes the way they express that can be very entertaining, so it's hard to not laugh at them and actually recognize it as sin.
Yeah.
That it's your responsibility as a parent to address.
Right.
Not
That's
that it's
true,
your
too.
responsibility to prevent, but it's just good to remember that.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so on that note, should you correct your toddlers?
Yeah.
All right, tell us more about that.
Oh, all right. Well, 90% of their brains are formed by the time they're 3. Somebody told me that, and I found it other times in different studies or whatever, just brain development stuff. And I always remembered it like right when you guys were almost turning 3, and I'd be like, oh no, because you have to get the patterns in there. Now, I'm totally making this up, but my understanding of that is that like the Pavlovian responses, like a bell rings and I salivate, or food comes out and I'm happy, or my mom walks in and I have peace, or somebody tells me no and I get angry. Like those direct responses are kind of set by the time they're 3. And again, who knows if I'm right, but it sounds right to me and it looks right to me with the people that I've had. So we have to actually try to connect the right things to the right responses for little kids, and we need to train them toward that really early so that by the time their brains are pretty much developed, those will be in place. So
I don't think when they turn 3 the window for teaching is over, but I think you're right that it's definitely not too early to start.
Right.
Like
And
their brains
it's-
are capable of learning
Oh,
and developing
absolutely.
in huge ways at that age.
Absolutely, and they're going to continue to learn the rest of their life. But as far as those very basic responses, it is almost too late. It really honestly is. Not that we should ever give up. If we haven't done that, then we've got to start right where we are, and we'll talk about that later too. But we really, really, if we have young kids, like I tried to remember, it's kind of hard to remember, but really training them and loving them early and directing them and disciplining them, all of that needs to happen as soon as they can understand and they're actually participating in that, because you want to get it in there before they turn 3 and then continue the rest of their life. The more you get in before, it's almost like a magic number, but not really. Like as soon as the brain reaches the 90%, the more you've gotten in there, the better their life goes the rest of their life, because they've got good reflexes and good responses to things and good habits already formed and good pathways, neural pathways, I don't know. So I really think that's vital to understand.
Maybe you can link that study so we can see that. And
Well,
share it with people.
I've read that a lot of different places, so I think it would be easy to find. And should you correct them? Yeah, if you love them, you will discipline them and correct them. We've already covered the 2 verses specifically that tell you straight from the Bible, if you love them, you will discipline them, you will reprove them just like God does. So that's super good. Should you correct them? Yeah, they're sinners. So all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And for we were born in sin from the time our mothers conceived us. The Bible tells us those 2 things specifically. And also we know that in Adam's sin, we have all fallen. We experienced the fall. So we inherit that. And for those reasons, it's understood, even though they're adorable and sweet and cute, we are not born good. We're born messed up. The world is messed up right now. And it's not that that makes God not love us. He loves us so much that because of that, he came and died for us. Like, God gets it. But we don't need to lie about the story or set our kids up to think they don't need salvation. Everybody's a sinner. And so we all need the love of God, and we need his help. On our own, we will not choose the right thing. We will not do the right thing. So that's a reason to be correcting them. Sure. I think anybody who actually knows children at all will already understand that. Like, you do not have to teach a little kid to say mine. No, wait, grab a little faster and then say, mine. Good. Try a little louder. Like, they know that. Yeah. They know how to think of themselves first. They know how to grab things, whatever their temperament is. You do not have to teach them. So there's another verse that says there's foolishness bound up in the heart of the child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. So that's God, the loving Father, saying it's already there. Like, you don't need to be taught. It's already there. Your sin and your messed upness is already there. Therefore, a loving parent will help the child with that. And help them get out of it. And then I remember James Dobson, who's just brilliant and did such a great job, and we are so thankful for the ministry that he had so many years. I'm a product of his ministry, and my children are really as well. He always said that about 18 months is the time when parents should begin to discipline. However, And by discipline, I mean the negative side, like correct or train, that sort of thing, not the positive. We saw a need every single time in our kids at 13 months, every kid. Like we knew for a fact that you guys understood what you were supposed to do and that you were intentionally doing the opposite. And we were very careful with that because every child is different and you can never really respond until you are very convinced that that's happening. It can't be a guess. It's better to let it go.
Is it ever difficult to tell, are you sinning or are you just hungry?
Yeah, it is. And we should never ever discipline a kid for being childish or being little or having needs. Like none of those things are sin. So yeah, it can be confusing, definitely. And that's the main difficulty. Like all of the things we talked about with toddlers, they're confusing. So yes, it can be confusing.
And they're confused too.
Right.
They don't know what they're thinking or feeling all the time.
So you need to study them and you need to have a biblical basis for understanding who they are and what they're going through. Like God's given us these little clues or huge clues to what we need to know about them in order to interpret what we're seeing. And so we would study you guys. And you were all really, really cute. But definitely at 13 months, we knew you were rebelling every now and then. So you're going to have to study your own child or whoever you're around.
So before we talk about how to correct kids, can you give us some ways not to?
Sure, like how to mess up kids, how to do it wrong.
Yes.
Definitely. I really have great friends, and like I hang out with some fantastic people. It seems like God gives us amazing people wherever we go that we get to be friends with. So I don't have a lot of like really close examples of horrible things, but I do know the best way to ruin children as much as we can is to have an addiction. So, but barring that, like talking about people who are really trying, who have their life pretty much under control and who love the Lord and love their kids, how can they mess up? Okay, so I guess in the other this can cross over, so I guess I'll put it here. Yeah. Abuse can happen from anybody, and that is never, ever, ever okay. Not for 1 minute. So good parents, it's possible for us to abuse our kids by suddenly yelling at them out of anger or physically smacking or whatever. I mean, that's just responding to something. There's never an excuse for that. And we all need to understand that we're all fallen and it's possible for anybody to do that. Like I can't put myself in a category where that could never happen because it could happen. So we have to say it. So that would be terrible. And then good parents who are really trying, who aren't falling into that, can still ignore and then hope that the kids learn by themselves. Mm-hmm. So that is something that I've seen. Like all of the kids throwing themselves on the floor and screaming, we're just going to ignore it and they will learn by themselves. I think there might be times to ignore it, but overall, hoping the kid figures it out and then trains themselves to not do it is not a good strategy. Mm-hmm. So my mom used to say, my mom has so much experience with kids. So she taught for 30 years in public and private school, and then she homeschooled my brother and my sister all the way through, and then she went back and taught again, and then was a principal. So she's worked with kids her whole life, and she's no spring chicken, although she looks like it. And she would always say that kids do not stop throwing fits ever on their own. They just learn to throw fits in a more socially acceptable way. Right. And I think that's absolutely true. So we see adults, if you really look, some dysfunctional adults, they're throwing fits in ways that look good. Mm-hmm. And so it's really, I think, a fallacy to just ignore a child totally and not train them out of throwing fits. I have more, 3 more.
Please,
okay, Okay. So I think it's a really bad parenting strategy to model patience by redirecting kindly. This is something that I did that I thought was really, really rocking parenting, and really it was terrible because what I was doing was modeling laziness.
Can you give us a specific example what that would look like?
So you do something totally wrong and you're 2, and I say, okay, oh, look at that bird. Did you see that bird? Let's go over there and let's...
Oh, okay.
Okay, so that's modeling.
Redirecting.
Yeah, redirecting and being all kind and colorful about it. That's great, but I didn't do my job. When I did that, I was modeling laziness and selfishness and fear of directly dealing with whatever problem just occurred. So it was easier really on me, and I looked good. I looked very patient, but that was very bad parenting. So I don't think that's the way to do it.
Okay.
Another one, and this is easy for any of us, is to give in after continual sin by a child. So I've done this so many times, but I have a memory of these amazing parents. Like, these are some of my favorite people. They're mature and they're godly and they're other-centered. But like me, when they were parenting, like the mom was standing in our kitchen, and the maybe 4-year-old was like, "Mom, mom, mom, mom," and very rudely screaming and trying to get her attention while the mom was talking. Well, no, you can't do that. And then she'd keep talking. No, don't do that. And then she'd keep talking. Finally, she turned around and addressed and rewarded, like, her 4-year-old who had been screaming. She never changed her behavior. She never did the right thing. And yet the mom turned and rewarded the girl, gave her the attention, answered her question, and helped her. So I say help not because it wasn't an emergency. She didn't need help. But I say that because they are great. Like, they were not dysfunctional parents at all. So it's easy for us to do that. I know I've done that as well, to give in after they're just continually still sinning.
Okay,
and then,
so these past 2 tips, it seems like it's not that big of a deal. Like, for a parent to kindly draw their toddler's attention elsewhere, or for a parent to quietly address the issue. I think you need to explain why that's an issue.
Okay.
How it affects the kid, and what sorts of behavior it reinforces.
Ooh, okay. So we already have a natural bent to take care of ourselves and to do what we want, and that is sin. That's like our reflection of sin. So kids already have that. They want to do what they want to do, and they want to do it their way, and they want to do it right when they want it, just like me. So whenever a parent allows that and then rewards it, it feeds this monster that goes very, very fast.
And what do you mean by reward? Like, are you talking about handing your kid candy, or?
There's so many ways to reward a kid. When we were actually in China, when we lived in China, that was a thing. Our kids were getting really spoiled and losing their minds. And so they would be, maybe our 2 or 4-year-old would be, well, the 2-year-old, she would be in the street, like, being rude and stomping her feet and crying and screaming. And people would walk up and give her candy. And it changed the behavior, but boy, that was really, really bad. So, but I do that not with candy, but by giving the child attention, necessarily, in response to their sin, or giving them what they're asking for in response for their sin. And every time I do that, even though it seems small, I'm actually rewarding their misbehavior. And again, that's going to grow a lot faster than what they don't want, which is self-control and obeying someone else, or waiting, or not getting what they want. If you train them in that way, it works, but it's not like that's going to grow as big. It takes a lot of times there, but to get what you want and be rewarded grows very fast.
So if rewarding can be something as simple as paying attention to your child, how do we avoid that? It seems a little difficult.
Paying attention in certain ways is a reward.
Okay.
So if my kid is screaming and being rude, and I get down on their level and I explain to them what I want and why I want it and what I want for them, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Now, should we get on the
so
level
that's
of
like,
our kid?
it's a positive interaction. It's very comforting.
It's attention from the parent.
You
It's
drop
wonderful.
everything else and focus on the child's needs, treating
their wants.
their wants,
Yes.
as more important.
And
than
let me
whatever
say,
else is
before we
going
go on, to get on the level of a child, to talk to them and to explain what we want and what God wants is great.
Right.
But to do it in response to sin is horrible. So what we need to do, they need to have a negative consequence for their negative behavior, and then all of the great things. So if you skip that negative consequence of whatever form it's going to be and go right to the reward, then you are reinforcing that selfish, sinful behavior every single time. And again, it doesn't take much reinforcement for that to really grow.
Right. And toddlers are not really listening to our words as much as our actions.
That's true.
So the effect on the kid, they're maybe not going to hear the wisdom that you're giving them.
Right.
But they will recognize subconsciously, oh, when I throw a fit, mom will come talk to me really nicely.
Exactly.
Okay.
And like, if I'm standing in the kitchen with my mom and I want her to stop talking to that other adult and talk to me and give me what I want, all I need to do is scream and pull on her like 4 times.
And it works.
It works.
On the 5th.
Right. And that actually, I mean, again, that message gets through to kids. So those are bad ways to parent toddlers. And there's one more that I wrote down.
Yeah, and before we get to that, how would you describe that situation in terms of teaching versus training?
Okay. Oh, so that's a great point she's bringing up. So we talked about my overall philosophy of parenting is that you start, I don't know which way you guys are facing, but left to right. Anyway, that we start 100% training, and that steadily goes downhill until they're done parenting, whenever that may be. And we start 0% teaching, and we go steadily up. So by the time they're graduated from our parenting, we are 100% teaching. There's no more consequence. There's no more grounding. There's no any of those things. So what
That's
that looks
when you're
like,
using words instead of actions.
all words and attention and the Word of God, yes. So for little people, they should definitely be at the point where they're far more training than teaching happening. And training is positive and negative results in response to either positive or negative behaviors. And that's where we need to be. For instance, I think the most explanatory example is when your 1-year-old reaches for a stove, you don't quietly say, well, honey, heat is transferred through metal quickly, and those molecules are going to, you pull their hand away immediately, and you smack their hand so that they never want to touch the stove again and burn their hands off. On the other side, you have an 18-year-old, and you don't say, what? Take those shorts off and get in your room for 2 weeks. You sit down and you say, okay, those are actually really cute, but I haven't done a good job talking about, because boy, they're 18, you haven't. Maybe I should make it a 12-year-old. Anyway, a 12-year-old is wearing shorts. We need to talk about appropriate clothing and why we care about that, and what the different effects are on different people, and what God thinks about that, because I have some ideas as to how that would apply. Let's go talk about that. That one's hard, but that would be the two extremes.
So when they're babies, it's almost 100% demonstrating rewards, punishments, training.
Right.
And then that decreases as explanations, discussions, teaching increases.
That's exactly right.
So,
and if we jump too quickly into the teaching only, we have completely missed our chance to train them, and they don't have the self-control necessary to apply what we're saying. Right. So it's a waste of time, and it can be even disingenuously negative because we're frequently rewarding that
and
behavior.
As you wean them off of the training stage, the teaching has to rise.
Yes.
Or else you're just not parenting.
Exactly. And I've thought a lot about, like, whoa, at what age does it go? At what percent? Like, I didn't have trouble really applying this with my own kids, because I think I was going by your intellect. Like, how much can you, and I was going by your character. Like, how much are you already obeying? The more you obey, the more I'm going to explain. The less you obey, the more you clearly need some more consequences. And your intellect. How much can you really even understand? Like, can you really read and apply a verse yet? And if you can, then that's when we do that. So it's not as difficult as I think the graph sounds, but that's the philosophy.
And it's not like you're doing
try.
It blindly. Like, you can see how these strategies are affecting your kids and whether or not their behavior and their heart is changing.
That's totally true. Yeah, if it's not working, you can step back,
Go ahead and tell us your last bad example.
Another bad way to parent toddlers is to give them timeouts. So I think and this is my opinion, but I think that timeouts for toddlers is completely meaningless almost every time. Child development people who actually know stuff and have studied stuff say that children don't really understand what timeout is and how it relates to a behavior until they're 4 or 5 years old. And I would say I would agree with that. And it's very difficult even after that to make timeout connect to the behavior it's supposed to respond to.
Why is that?
I think it's possible, but I think it's very difficult. For one thing, a lot of people put kids in timeout in their room, which is a place that the mom or the dad have decorated and have filled with things the kid loves and made comfortable for them. So why is that? That's a reward.
It's not really a punishment.
Right. And then other times it's confusing and it's difficult to understand why sitting in a chair has to do with what we just did. It's just hard to connect that.
And their attention spans are really short.
Right, so they're not
it's
thinking.
Hard to connect.
Yeah, they're not still thinking about what they did. Now they've been sitting on a chair for 5 minutes and they don't really, it's hard to remember. Thirdly, I think it's not good emotionally for the kids because it's like, I don't love you for 10 minutes. No, you may not come. I don't want to talk to you. And I don't think that's a good message at all because we do want our children and we don't want to push them away. I don't think that's what God does with us. He doesn't give us a time in which, now there are consequences for our actions, but like you could go to jail for something and that could be very fair. But God's love it's not withheld. His forgiveness is complete and His mercy is new every morning. He doesn't make us wait in some purgatory.
He doesn't stop listening or remove Himself
from us. Right. We remove ourselves from Him, but He doesn't remove. So I think time out for toddlers is typically not productive.
Do you think it's better for other ages?
Like I said, I never used it, but I think it can be productive for other ages if all those other requirements are met. I still think it's dangerous emotionally, so you just have to be really careful about that they don't feel like you are distancing or pulling yourself away from them for a certain period of time, like you're not loving them for a while or you're not liking them for a certain period of time. I think that's not productive at all. But they can get to an age if they really, and they have to want to be either doing what they were doing or around those people in order for it to be a bad consequence. Like if they like to take a break and read a book and you let them take a break and read a book, then that's not a negative consequence for them. So it has to fit their personality, their understanding, and still I'd be careful with it.
Yeah. Okay, so that's really helpful. But it seems like you've eliminated all of our options. We can't pay attention to our kids. We can't explain things to them. We can't even put them in timeout.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Wow. Okay, so I wrote down some things that either we have done. Some of these things I'm not going to talk about in first person. I'm going to talk about as good parents, so other people. Just because I don't know I don't know who you are. Some of my good friends are watching. Other people I don't know might eventually watch this. So I'm going to try to be really wise and careful about how I describe these things. But the first thing you want to do with toddlers is you want to teach them in the first place. So that means teach them what is expected and what the consequence would look like, what obedience would look like, what sin would look like, and what consequence would happen. Like that takes time and forethought. And if you haven't done that, I don't think you really have a right to give any kind of a negative response later.
So when you say in the first place, do you mean before they even start to sin?
Right.
Or as soon as it happens?
Before they even get in the situation, I would say.
Okay.
So a good parent would be one who would say, okay, we're going to go to the store. So when we're in the store, we need to talk very quietly. Because a lot of people are trying to remember their lists or they're walking through or they don't want to be bothered if they work there. So we're going to talk pretty quietly to each other. And when we're in the store, we're not going to grab things off of the shelves because anything we grab we have to put back or mom has to buy. We're not going to grab things. When we're in the store, we're going to get what mom and dad decided we're going to get and not all the things we want. So you have to ask stuff like that. When we're in the store, we're going to stay right by the cart because I have to know where you are. And there are bad people sometimes, so we just need to be safe about that. But I also need to know that you're with me, stuff like that. Pretty much every time we drove anywhere, we would review what the behavior was going to need to be at the arrival spot. So, okay, guys, we're going to a birthday party. Now, what do we do when the mom says to come inside for the cake? What do we do? And they would tell me, we go inside. Yeah. What do we do when the birthday boy is opening up his presents? We watch. Good. Should we crowd to the front and make sure we're the only ones who could see the birthday presents? No. Like, I try to cover all the things. Yeah. What do we say when somebody gives us a piece of cake? Thank you. Do we say that loudly or quietly? Loudly. Do we say it right away or do we wait just a minute? We say it right away. So they have heard and they know. And then on the negative side, when we're playing with other kids, when we get to their house, we're going to share toys. So if you want to play with a toy, but also Edna wants to play with a toy, what are we going to do? So we talk about that. And we have a lot of talking. And when they're even littler than talking, I would spend a lot of time modeling. And so we would practice it before they go anywhere. And now that we didn't really have to do as we had subsequent kids, because the older kids would act it out in real life for the younger kids, but especially for the first few, we would act it out and we would practice it. So we might act out parts of a birthday party and we would practice saying thank you. Or we would act out church. Do you remember that?
No.
We would set up chairs and we would practice maybe for 5 minutes and they would get fruit snacks because they sat and they listened to me read the Bible. So we would practice different things so that they understood, and I knew they understood what was what was expected of them for their behavior. That takes time. That takes a lot of time. But you have time, with a toddler typically, hopefully, if you could just spend time with them. So teach them in the first place would be the number one thing. And then be very clear and intentional about each command that you give. So I would need to say, Ab, could you give me that cup? Thank you. You know, it's very clear. Could you please give me that cup? And then she gives me the cup. I wouldn't say, go clean up the kitchen. What? Why didn't you clean? Like, that's super not clear for a little kid. Or what would be another example of being very intentional with things I told you guys to do?
I think what you're trying to say is don't make the consequences a mystery, or like set
The
out the
expectations.
expectations really
Yes.
clearly.
Make
Because
those
if they
not a
don't
mystery,
know
yes.
this is bad, it will result in this, and you surprise them with a consequence, then
Right.
that can be damaging.
You're actually saying the next thing. That's
Oh, okay.
exactly true too.
But
But you just
also,
made it clear with
I was
the
thinking
expectations.
you have to kind of pick your battles. So don't tell your kid to do a stupid thing that you're not willing to follow through on.
Like put a cat in your head?
yeah.
Okay, so Ab was doing an amazing job obeying, and she was really learning, and she was 1.5. And so she had a little stuffed cat from Grandma and Grandpa, and she loved to put it on her head, and it was so funny. We'd laugh, because actually it's so entertaining. I'm telling you,
Sure.
they're so cute. So, yeah, because that's not that funny thinking about doing that right now. But it was. So she would put the cat in her head and we'd play. So one day she's obeying and we're laughing and we're just doing stuff. And then I would say, oh, make the cat jump. And she would make the cat jump. We'd laugh. And then I'd say something else. And at one point I said, put the cat in your head. And she went, like she decided in that moment she was going to defy me. Well, what a stupid thing to tell her to do. Like, I just told you to put the cat on your head. And so now as your parent, you're supposed to obey me. That's so dumb. So what do I do with
You
that?
had to follow through.
I did. And so, I mean, I actually told her, Ab, that was not important for me to tell you to put the cat on your head. But anytime I say something, you do need to obey. So it wasn't like a wrong thing. It was just meaningless and stupid on my part. So we had a little consequence for that. But don't do that. Like, if you're telling your kids to do stuff, make sure you mean it.
And make sure they understand what's
Right.
being required of them.
Exactly. So that's what I mean. Okay, so we do that. And then when they don't, like when they don't follow through with the expectation, you need to kindly pull them over and review right then. So what was the command? What did I tell you to do? And what did you do?
So are you making sure that they understood? Or are you helping them to realize what the consequence has to do with?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. I'm making sure, because I already know they know. So we're reviewing it verbally so that they can connect it in a separate way. So we're going to connect it physically, but we're also connecting it verbally right then.
Yeah.
And we're reviewing it and we're spelling it out so they have no question as to what is happening. So what did I tell you to do, but what did you do? So what is the consequence? And then good parents, in general, spank for rebellion. So if you're clearly communicating your expectations, that should be most of your corrections.
What are the other options?
You should never discipline for childishness or a mistake or an unknown standard. That is unjust.
Yeah.
Like, that's total injustice. So injustice, whatever. It's wrong. So don't do that. Like, if the kid did not know, or this is the worst. When other kids come to your house, they don't know your standards. And so if a kid picks up something that your kids know not to pick up, to respond to them rudely is just wrong. And especially if we're the parent of our own child, we should absolutely know
Right.
what standards they're aware of and what they're not, and never discipline in any way for something
And
they
you
did
probably
not know
shouldn't
about.
be disciplining someone else's kids.
Well, I think talking rudely right then is disciplining, and
Right.
it's inappropriate. Yeah. Oh, you're right. Not at all. but I see parents forget a lot that they have these standards that they know well, and kids do not.
Right.
I think that's really, really bad. So, sorry. Good parents practice. If they're going to spank, they would use something that they know for a fact is not going to actually harm their child, but rather just deliver a sting, a small, short, negative consequence, which is clearly understood by all ages. And what I would recommend doing, if they were to do this, would be to use a wooden spoon and practice on their own leg many, many times. So they know exactly how it feels, exactly what it is, and it's very easy to do, and it's very, you need to be practiced to make sure you're delivering, like I said, just a small negative consequence that the child understands for their good. And the word discipline, I just want to take another minute and redefine that, because I realize that other people have completely different ideas of what we're talking about if we say the word spank or discipline, and I one time a young mom came up to me and she said, "Oh, you know what? I remember like things that we had talked about, and so when my daughter did something, I just wailed right at, like I just smacked her. I was like, so I had to repent. Like that was terrible. That was, don't ever do that ever, ever, ever. So let's just be really clear and review again. So the word discipline is not abuse at all in any way, but it's a controlled, loving, intellectually rather than emotionally driven, accurate response to a clear virtue or a clear sin, usually rebellion. So that's what I'm meaning by that. And it's almost always taken and removed from the situation physically and mentally. Like you stop everything that's happening, you remove yourself from the child, and then you talk about things. Then a spanking or a consequence would be delivered so that there is no mistaking the fact that it is not an emotional response in any way. It is never, again, in response to a mistake or childishness or an unknown standard, and it's never delivered off the cuff. It can never be delivered in anger or without explanation, like ever. So if you're still angry with what happened, then you cannot discipline your child.
Yeah.
So.
And why do you think this is so effective? Why does it connect to a toddler?
Oh, yeah. So we talked about how timeout doesn't connect to a toddler, but
Right.
this is instant, and instant in that it is an immediate consequence in itself. And you've just reviewed why.
So it's easy to correlate it to the action that they just did.
Yeah, and I think it mimics nature in that when we do something that is hurtful to us, we have a response of pain, and it tells us to pull away or stop or immediately get help. Like, that's how the world
it's like
works.
Touching a hot stove.
Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of things where pain is what tells us to stop doing what we're doing. And I think we are built that way. So a very small amount of pain will tell us to stop doing what we were doing. Yeah, it's like the same. So it's very, very clear. It's understood by everyone.
It's also
very
short.
effective.
It's not prolonged or torturous.
Yes. And the parent is loving the entire time. So there's never you stay over there and I stay over here, or I'm not going to talk to you.
Right.
It is the parent is there and involved and loving and forgiving the entire process. So for that reason, I think it's far more effective and far more mimicking what God does with us.
And it's also in the Bible, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The rod of discipline and shall drive it from him, and spare the rod, spoil the child. Like that's what that's talking about. And God, being the perfect parent, has always been perfectly patient, and He is love, and He disciplines those He loves in ways that are totally beneficial and will be used for the good of the people He's disciplining. So we need to be like God. We want to be like God. We want to be more like Him. I think that delivering, illustrating, and explaining the gospel are the main parts of parenting. Like that is the main point. And it starts when they're babies. And toddlers, it gets explicit. So this is what we're doing. A consequence for sin is like the first point in the story of the gospel. You need to know that you're a sinner before you will ever need to consider or want to consider Jesus' sacrifice, or let alone accepting it. Like you have to know there is a need. And I think if anyone's honest, we all know we're sinners, and we all know the world's messed up. But kids need to learn that. So I think this is the very first step. And when we're taking a child aside, even very little kids, we are already talking about, we're taking them through the gospel every single time. So the first point is the sin. Like that was sin. Ab, when she was really little, she did a little video of like conference of her own, and she would tell Bible stories. And at one point, pretend Moses did something, and she leaned forward. That was sin. God hates sin. So like she had heard that so many times. That's sin. God hates sin. Yeah. And then we would say, that sin that you just committed, Jesus died for that sin, and He paid for it. And because He did, you can be forgiven. Now, our words would differ with age and with how many times they've heard it. We wouldn't continually say the exact same words every time, because that would get rote. But with their understanding, we would be reminding, and I think I could have done a better job explaining that last part with you guys when we would go through consequences for sin. But that's the point. That's what we're trying to do, is explain this is a problem. It's not what God wants. Therefore, here's the negative consequence. Now, He paid for that, and you can be forgiven. you need to accept Jesus' sacrifice on this thing, then you are on the cross. Then you need to learn to walk with him, which would prevent you from doing this or take you right back to the cross every time you do. That's what we're doing, starting with toddlers.
And you're not just giving them the gospel, which is obviously the first and foremost and most important job as a parent, but you're also teaching them how to have self-control. So right now they're obeying you, but later on they'll be obeying teachers or their governmental officials or
their bosses.
Law enforcement, or their bosses for sure. Or other people, respecting their authorities that they've chosen to put themselves under.
Absolutely.
In family and church.
And mostly
the
God.
Lord.
Yeah. That's actually the beauty of obedience. So their brain will be trained. The more we're able to do this well, the more their brain is trained and shaped to respond with self-control and to respond with positivity to a command that's contrary to their will. So they're practicing over and over, being told to do things that may or may not be what they want to do right then, and they are practicing responding cheerfully and completely obeying immediately over and over and over. And again, those pathways that we talk about and how the brain is developing, that is really happening, and those are getting set. So the more they're train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old he will not depart from it. I think that's what it's talking about.
And I think there's other ways for a kid to know God and to understand the gospel, but they can understand the gospel and not have what you're giving them, which is consistent developing this skill of self-control, this skill of delayed gratification, of knowing this is what's right and I don't want to do it, but I know I need to, so I will.
Exactly.
Or this feels so good and I want to do it, but I know I shouldn't, and so I won't.
Yourself to stop.
And that applies to everything at every age forever.
Yeah.
So it's really pretty important.
And this is the best time to implement it. If you can make yourself do things that you don't feel like doing and do the right thing instead, that's totally awesome.
It's like a life skill.
Yeah, it's the most important.
You can't
life
survive
skill.
without it.
And this is why the commands to children are all directed at one thing, which is obey. That's why God did this, because it's at the foundation of walking with him. I would also say that the beauty of having done this, the beauty of the child learning to obey early on, is that they're not angry at weak and unprotecting authorities. So parents who do not do this, who never say no, or who think they're going to just teach themselves and they'll grow out of it, or parents who ignore them in other ways, or parents who respond positively to their sin, that actually angers a child. And we can talk about that a different time, but a child-centered home would be how you would describe that, or you can describe it, and that creates anger in the heart of a child. Like, they know they're not supposed to be in charge. Like, yeah, sure, I wanted whatever I just said, but you're supposed to be in charge, and you're supposed to be parenting me and protecting me. I don't actually know how to run the world, and it's scary
stressful.
And it's stressful.
You don't
and
feel
so,
safe if you don't know what your boundaries are.
Exactly. And then everything's out of control, and kids really either can go off the rails or can have rage or can go into depression. And it's not that that's the only cause of those things, but those are very common responses to parents who do not take their biblical responsibility of parenting, disciplining, and training their children.
Yeah.
So the beauty of obedience is that you're avoiding a lot of that, and that the children are not driven entirely by their own emotions. Because we all start out that way. We are driven 100% by our emotions. I feel whatever, fill in the blank. Not that it's sin in a baby to feel hunger, but really that's it. All they know is I feel something, fix it. And that's fine in a lot of ways. That's also sinful in some of those ways. And so as we grow, we get more into the sinful side. But anyway, not being driven by your emotions is a gift. Or not having to be driven, not being slaves to sin.
For sure. Before we conclude, can you give us an example of what this would actually look like in practice?
Sure. So I would say toddler. Let's see, grocery store is the most common. Easy one. So we've already, what do we do in the store? We've had that discussion. So they know they need to talk quietly and stay with mom. And then we get in the store, and let's say this good family, someone other than myself, has a little 2 or 3-year-old, and the 2 or 3-year-old wants Skittles. And the mom says, no, we only get those on your birthday. We're not going to get Skittles today, so you need to put those. No! And the kid screams, and the mom says, okay, that's sin. We don't scream in the store, and you're not obeying mom. Because she told the kid to talk quietly, and she told the kid no to the Skittles. So he's just disobeyed in 2 different ways. And so he screams again, and she says, okay, we're going to have to go to the car now. And so she has to take her stuff, and she needs to pull her cart to the front and ask if they can hold it for her, or if they can return it, and she has to apologize. Or if there's a few things, maybe she could put it back, I don't know. But this good family leaves the store, and the kid might still be screaming, and the kid might be throwing themselves on the floor. And the mom just has to pick him up and calmly restrain them while he's kicking and screaming and whatever he's doing. Which is embarrassing, but the mom can't be driven by that embarrassment, and it is comforting to know that everybody was a child, so we should be able to deal with it. The mom is trying to move fast because at the same time she knows it does bother the people around. It is not pleasant to hear this or to have to be experiencing this, so she's moving quickly, but she's also not just overcome by shame. So she's parenting her child, so she's going to take him out and get in the car. In this day and age, I would recommend that the parent drive home and walk in. But if there's possible to have privacy, then the parent right away can say, okay, what did we say? What did I tell you about being in the store? We're going to talk quietly. Yeah, did you talk quietly? Okay, that was not obeying. When I told you to put the Skittles back, did you put the Skittles back? That was not obeying. That's sin. God hates sin. We don't do that. Okay, so we're going to have to get a consequence. So you need to put your hands down, and then maybe this good mom will give them 2 smacks on the outside of their pants on back where they're padded and it cannot do damage. And then maybe the kid cries out of anger, or maybe it kind of hurt or whatever. Maybe the kid calms down, and then the mom can talk the kid through the apology process, which would be 5 steps. But if not, and the kid is still screaming, then I would just restrain the kid. That is when it's like a timeout, but it's a completely different premise. So what I would recommend is putting the child somewhere very safe, not scary, but also not fun and not super comfortable, like the bathroom, as long as they're safe with that. And then have the parent say, okay, I've disciplined you like God wants me to, and you are welcome to give me a hug, come back into fellowship, whatever you want, to come play now, or we're going to go back to the store. Whatever it is, you are welcome to all of those, but after you repent. So if you're not ready to repent, you're going to need to stay here, and I'm going to need to shut the door. And as soon as you say you're sorry, you can come out. And then the mom shuts the door and sits right outside the door and continues, like she can stick her fingers under the kid, knows she's right there, but the kid cannot come out. She can continue to talk and maybe open the door. Are you ready to say you're sorry? She makes sure that the kid understands that he has to say sorry, if that's the word that they're looking for right then, but show actual repentance or just give up, and she has to shut the door. The kid is usually going to say, I don't understand, or yeah, or that's not what, or give excuses or give it, and the mom just needs to say, okay, that's not repenting. Yep, I'm waiting for you to say sorry. That's not saying sorry. Okay, now, yeah, you can keep saying that, but I'm waiting for you to say sorry. As soon as you say sorry, you can come out and we can have our fun day again. And this goes on until the kid finally gives up. So I think the first couple times that this happens can be long and difficult.
Kind of inconvenient. Like, there goes your whole day. You didn't get the groceries. Mm-hmm. This is the only thing you might accomplish in 24 hours. Uh-huh. Is that okay? Should it be like that?
It's way better than okay. And if it has to be like that, that's what it has to be like.
Why is this more important than getting food to fix for dinner, to have ready when Dad comes home, or whatever else was on the agenda?
Yeah, the point is that those things are very temporal, and it's one day. But what you've established with your child is going to last them the rest of their life. And hopefully they'll have a lot of years we don't know how long they're going to be able to live, but that is hopefully more than one day. So right there, it already outweighs it. Plus, it's directly obeying God on the part of the parent. Like, we're doing what God wants, and that really pleases him. Right. Whether we ever see fruit, we have pleased him right there by obeying him and disciplining our child lovingly. And the child has learned a huge, huge lesson, that they are not going to get what they want by being rude in public, which they really learn very quickly. Again, these people are smart, very short-lived people.
Is this something that you end up doing day after day for years, or does it come up a few times and ceases to be an issue? How much of a commitment is this whole parenting thing?
Yeah. It's a pretty big commitment. So I would say most, but definitely not all, most kids will have 0 to 1 big showdowns. but that's not a guarantee. There are some kids, especially if they've had trauma when they're younger, like major trauma, and their brain has really honestly been hurt and it has developed wrong, it's going to be way harder for them to understand cause and effect. So with that child, it might last just many, many times over the years. But I would say for most of the childs I've had have either had 0 or 1 big showdown where the question is, who is going to be in charge here, me or you? The parent or the child or the parent? And so in those situations, and actually in every time that question comes up, even the smaller ones, the parent has to win. Now, when I say win, you can take that badly. Oh, what? You're going to crush their spirit and you're going to give them, I don't know. But no, actually what it is showing that the parent is absolutely the authority. It's not that we're perfect. It's not that we're more valuable, but it is that we are the authority, and you can rest in that and know you are not going to be the authority. And so for those reasons, the parent has to win. So this showdown that we've discussed, this very extreme situation in which the parent had to leave the store, that is actually vital to setting that boundary. And usually it doesn't happen, again, like it'll happen in small ways, like you'll go through the process many, many times. But to have that size, at least in our 8, it didn't happen more than once really badly. I will say, like one of ours, I think I've talked about before, she lasted 4 hours and she had already gotten a negative consequence, and then she would not repent. And she was, I don't remember how old, something like 4, but 3 or 4. Anyway, she was in the laundry room with the gate in front of it. So we were talking to her and we were with her. She had everything she needed. She went to the bathroom a couple times, but she would not say she was sorry for over 4 hours. And then the kids, the rest of you guys were pleading with her.
We were so invested.
All of us
Mom
were
would come in, Dad would come in, siblings would come. If you just say sorry, then it'll all be better. You won't have to stay in here for so long.
And it went on and on and on and on and on. And finally she did say she was sorry. She came out, and we never had that again with her.
She learned.
Yeah. And we had the cup showdown with Ab, where she would not put the cup in the kitchen. That was her horrible command that I gave her. So she would push it, like at one point she was pushing the cup up to the line on the floor. And then she would look at us. And this lasted, like we had 26 rounds. It was forever. But she never did that again. Yeah. And again, that's not a guarantee. But that's typically how it goes.
Yeah. Okay, I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
What if you are not the kid's parent? What if you're a nanny or a teacher and you just do not have the right or the ability to discipline them in a specific way?
Yeah.
What do you recommend?
Those are very difficult circumstances, and that's one of the reasons I'm really thankful that we were able to homeschool, actually, because a teacher doesn't have the right or the authority or the ability to discipline in any of these ways. They just really don't. And so the heart issues cannot be addressed there. They're as deeply. They can be addressed, but not as deeply and not as effectively as a parent can do. So your hands are tied, and they are permanently tied to that. Like, you just don't have the right. Parents can give caregivers authority to enact certain consequences, like taking away privileges or timeouting or whatever. But it's more of a manipulative system. So I was like a master babysitter, not gonna lie, and I had some super difficult people. I'm probably talking to you right now. Actually, I love them. But as a babysitter, that's where I learned the art of manipulation. Because I wasn't a believer, so I didn't know the gospel, and I wasn't trying to teach them. But I knew what was right and wrong, and so I would try to teach what was right. And when they didn't, I would the same principles apply as far as the teacher or the caregiver cannot be angry, and the response cannot be out of their emotion. It just has to be out of love and out of patience, and it's well set up beforehand. Yeah. So whatever it is, make the expectations very, very clear. Make sure the child absolutely understands what the expectations are, and that they can understand, and that they can actually accomplish what you're asking them to. And once that's set, then you describe, if they do not, what the consequence will be. So the loss of privilege is the general one, but it could even be a step down on a chart. Like, you can move something down, and maybe when it gets far enough, the parents deal with it when they get home, something like that. Or it can be M&M's set out, they lose one. Or it could be an extra chore they have to do if they're old enough to be able to accomplish something like that.
Whenever we babysat, we did marks on the board, and if you get a certain number, then that number is there for mom and dad to see when they get home, and then they're going to have to deal with it.
Anything over one, we would deal with.
Obviously, this doesn't, it's not a perfect system,
right?
Because you're already delaying the consequence, and it's harder to make a clear connection between the sin issue and the immediate consequence.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this can work if the parents are already disciplining and already setting these precedents and training their kids. You can send them off with a babysitter or to Sunday school or, to a teacher or whatever. You can put them in a different situation, and those less than ideal consequences can still be helpful if you're also backing them up.
Right. So one of the best things my mom did with very difficult students that she had was just clearly set out the boundaries beforehand, and often that was all she had to do. Like a lot of times they never even got to the point where they needed a consequence because she so clearly set out the expectations.
Yeah.
She made sure they totally understood that, and a lot of times the kids just thrived. What's the past tense of thrived?
Thriven.
They thrive. So the kids thrive in those situations. So when we are the teacher,
thrived.
Okay, well, when we are the teacher or the caregiver, we can set that out. On that note, I should put this on one of the worst things you can do is to parent like you're the teacher. And I've known, some of the best parents I know are public school teachers, but I know of a few who are public school teachers who then turn and treat their kids the same way they treat their class, which is bad parenting. And the kids are like, I don't know why they're not totally obeying. They're cool. I'm like, wow. So it's different. It's a different situation. It's a different scale, but a lot of the same principles apply. And you can have a lot of a positive effect.
Yeah.
I also think there's one other thing that I was thinking about. This plays into parenting, but cannot be the main role, and that is, I call it manipulation, but what I mean is like a positive selling of a certain good action or activity. Yeah. And so that was what I did.
Persuading them to do something.
Something that's
rather
good
than
or right.
Laying out the options and allowing them to decide. You're trying to manipulate or convince or persuade.
Well, you do both.
Yeah.
So you want to lay everything out and give them choices, but you make the good one look really good. And that is actually something that I think we can all work on. And even though that's not how I got that would have been wrong for me to do that in order to get my kids to obey, if that's all I did. I think in addition to actually being a faithful and consistent parent who's training them, that selling of the positive activity or behavior is an aspect that should play in.
And that's biblical too. I mean, it's all over the wisdom literature, Proverbs. It's like you're laying out, look, this is the good life. This is what it looks like. These are benefits that you can expect if you follow God and do what's right. And then also, look, this is what it's like to be a fool, to reject God. Mm-hmm. This is how it affects you in your life. You're clearly painting obedience as the better life.
Right.
And you can do that as a parent too.
And again, that becomes explicit when they get old enough and you're teaching them more and more and more. But even when they're really little, like one thing, if we had like a workbook or something that we wanted to do or write letters, my mom would sit at a table and she would be working on it and she would be just so happy with it. And we'd come up, what do you do, Mom? She's like, oh no, I'm sorry, this isn't for you, this is just for me. And then she would just keep writing and she would love it. She would work on it and we'd be like, well, what is that? Can I do stuff? Maybe when you're older you get to do it. I don't know. You have to go do something. And then we're like, but can I do it? Can I write letters and pay bills or whatever it was? And then she would be like, well, okay. Just this once you can write a letter to your grandma. And we'd be like, oh, yes! And so it was the best. So that was a kind of lame example, but that's actually what she did. So she would be making whatever is good, like Tom Sawyer with his fence.
Oh, yeah. Whitewashing the fence.
Yeah. So, again, just to be clear, that cannot be the parenting philosophy, but it can play in, and it can be used to the advantage of the child by caregivers and teachers and also parents.
So also, if you're a nanny or a babysitter or you ever have some sort of authority over kids, one thing that's really helpful is to establish with the parents what you can do. So ask them, what do I do when your kid disobeys? Because I want to be loving, but I also want to be firm. And if they don't respect me and my authority, then I'm not able to take care of them like I want to.
Right.
So is there some sort of consequence or
a privilege I could take away?
Exactly.
Or a system I could
What
use?
would you prefer that I do? Because you would never, ever go behind a parent's back to discipline their kids or threaten something that you can't follow through on.
Right.
Like, it's best to it's really the only option is to clarify with the parents what you have the right to do.
And as a parent, I would like you to give me your ideas, because that's not how I parent, because I have the biblical authority to actually discipline. So, well, I don't know what you should do. But if you come to me with an idea like, here's a chart, could we use this chart? Would you be comfortable if we took these things and made them privileges, like screen time or dessert or whatever it is, reading time, that's a good reward, or a walk around the block, something the kid loves. Could I use those as positive motivators, like rewards? So you definitely get them on board with ideas.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I have some friends who nanny or take care of kids who have wonderful, stable family situations where they discipline and know God and teach well and train well. And I also know some who are responsible for some kids who just don't have structure, don't have discipline, no boundaries. And even as a caregiver or a nanny, like you have an opportunity to provide structure even if their parents aren't.
Right.
So I think that really depends on what you're able to establish with the parents.
Right.
You can say, look, I understand that you let your kids have Gatorade for breakfast, but I need to have some sort of authority. I need to have some sort of structure. Try to explain it to them and then establish what you can do, and then just be consistent.
Right.
Even if their parents aren't consistent and they're not learning or reinforcing good things, you can still make an impact and make a difference.
So we're talking about toddlers right now. We're running out of time. So just to wrap up, wait a second. All right, you're here. Sorry about that. Just to wrap up, I think parenting toddlers is the most exciting, and I think it's the most fruitful, because what you're establishing now really should last the rest of their life. Like, and it doesn't mean they won't sin, it doesn't mean they won't go off the rails, because they have free will, they can choose to do wrong things, but it does set their brain up really well. You have the power to affect that. I think that's so encouraging. And so to really get in and be completely consistent, while the consequences are very small. So we are talking about whether or not they'll get to eat a cookie or play with a certain toy. We are not talking about whether they are going to go off and do drugs or ruin their life. Like, we're talking about small consequences. We're also talking about situations where parents really can still control quite a bit. And we need to capitalize on that. But at the same time, if you're in a situation where you did not teach your kids to obey and your kids are older, is it too late? Like, what do we do now? So I would just say it's never too late to start loving your kids in this way and to start training them. It's going to be more difficult, and it's going to be slower usually, not necessarily. It's going to be more difficult, but it's never too late to start and to really try to establish discipline in the authority system.
It's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of time, and you're going to want to set aside a couple of days to really focus on it. And explain to your kids, hey, we haven't been consistent, but we're doing a new thing. We're going to learn how to obey. Get your spouse on board.
Yes, we call that boot camp. That's exactly it. It needs to be like boot camp too. Like we described, the one situation can take hours, but that is such an investment into that child's future. And you can't do that and then do the opposite the next day. You have to stay consistent.
You have to commit, and you have to make sure your kids know that you're committed.
Right.
Say, this is how we're doing it now. We don't have Gatorade for breakfast anymore.
Or we don't scream at our mom. We don't disobey. One more thing real quick is when you're thinking about potty training, a lot of times people will block out like a couple weeks, and that's totally right. This is more important and needs to be the same. Like, you need to block out time to be able to work on obedience boot camp. That's their main job. That's the main thing that God's telling them to do for all kinds of good reasons that we can understand and that we can't understand. And to be able to establish that and for them to respond positively to your commands is the best thing you can do for your kid. That's how you love them the most when they're toddlers.
It's a huge commitment, and it's really hard at first. But once they understand it gets so much easier.
You've seen it a lot of times.
Yeah,
You've got a lot of toddlers. Well, I hope that is helpful to you. Thank you guys for spending time with us. We are so honored that you just sat here and talked with us actually just did the listening part. But if you talked, I'm sure what you said was really good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you guys. We'll see you next week.
Bye.